If you like this story, please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next exciting stories. And now let's enjoy the story.
The wind howled through the desolate stretch of road as the sleek, black luxury car sliced through the thick snowfall. The only sound that could be heard above the roaring engine was the soft, muffled whimpering of a dog. In the back seat, Bella, a heavily pregnant golden retriever, lay curled up, trembling uncontrollably. Her golden fur shimmered under the dim interior lights, but it did little to warm her. Her belly was swollen with life, each kick from the puppies a gentle reminder of what was to come. Yet, something felt terribly wrong. Bella's keen instincts told her this wasn't a usual trip. The man driving, Victor Holloway, sat in the front seat, his eyes focused on the road ahead, his hands gripping the wheel. His sharp jawline was set in a firm, emotionless expression. Despite the growing unease that crept up in his gut, he said nothing, his thoughts distant. He had raised Bella since she was a puppy, but as time passed, his interest in her had waned. She had served her purpose, and now it seemed she was nothing more than a burden. The storm outside raged on, but inside the car, there was a disturbing silence. Bella's breath came in shallow puffs as she looked up at Victor through the rearview mirror. Her golden brown eyes were filled with confusion, her body shivering, unable to comprehend why they had stopped in the middle of nowhere. Without a word, Victor reached for the door handle, his face blank. The cold air rushed in as he opened the door, stepping outside and slamming it shut behind him. Bella's ears flicked in response, a low whimper escaping her throat as she stared at him, her eyes filled with desperation. Victor didn't look back. His cold, indifferent gaze remained fixed on the snowy expanse ahead. Without hesitation, he reached into the back seat, grabbing Bella by the collar, and roughly dragged her from the car. Bella struggled to regain her footing, but her swollen belly made it hard for her to balance on the icy road. The snow stung her face, but she didn't understand. She didn't understand why he was doing this, why he was abandoning her. "Please, what are you doing?" Her silent plea echoed in her mind, but no words left her mouth. She could only whimper, her body trembling as Victor yanked the collar from her neck and dropped it in the snow. Victor stood over her for a moment, his eyes cold and detached. He didn't seem to care that the dog he had raised for years was now helpless, struggling to survive in the freezing cold. Without a second glance, he turned and climbed back into the car. The engine roared to life as Bella watched helplessly, her heart pounding in her chest. She barked desperately, stumbling forward with what little strength she had left, but the car sped away, its red taillights disappearing into the storm. Bella's legs wobbled as she tried to chase after him, but her body was too weak. Her swollen belly made every movement a struggle. The snow grew deeper, and the freezing winds pushed against her frail form. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her vision growing blurry as exhaustion set in. She tried to call out again, but her voice was drowned by the howling wind. Soon she could no longer see the taillights, and the world around her fell into eerie silence. The snow continued to fall heavily, covering the tracks of the car and erasing all traces that Bella had ever been there. Her body collapsed onto the icy ground, her legs too weak to support her. She lay still, her breathing slowing as she fought to stay conscious. The puppies inside her stirred weakly, a silent reminder that she couldn't give up, not yet. But as the bitter cold enveloped her, she felt the weight of despair settle in her bones. If she stayed here much longer, she would die. The thought filled her with sorrow, but she was too cold to move, too exhausted to escape. Just as her vision blurred and her body began to shut down, she heard it. A low rumble in the distance. It was faint at first, barely audible over the howling wind, but it grew louder. Headlights cut through the swirling snow, a truck skidding to a stop just a few feet away from Bella's motionless form. The driver's door opened, and heavy boots crunched through the snow. A man's voice called out in the distance, "Hey, stay with me, I got you." The warmth of the truck's interior was a welcome relief as the man scooped Bella into his strong arms. She couldn't resist, her body too weak to even struggle. Everything around her faded to black. Bella's body lay limp in the stranger's arms as he rushed toward his truck. Her once sleek coat was matted with wet snow, her breathing shallow and erratic. The cold had drained what little strength she had left, and her only hope now rested in the hands of this unknown man. Ethan Carter, a man of few words, cradled the fragile German shepherd as he carefully loaded her into the passenger seat of his truck. His heart raced with urgency as he slammed the door shut and immediately cranked the heater up to full blast. He could feel her light, fragile body shivering uncontrollably against him. Ethan had seen his fair share of abandoned animals, but this was different. This was cruelty at its most heartless, leaving a pregnant dog out in the freezing snow with no chance of survival. Whoever had done this was no better than a monster. Ethan's grip tightened on the steering wheel as he navigated through the worsening storm, the wind howling and snow swirling around him, reducing visibility to almost nothing. He gritted his teeth, his thoughts consumed with the question of why someone would be so heartless. But for now, his focus was on Bella. He couldn't change the past, but he would do everything in his power to ensure she would have a future. The road was treacherous, each inch an obstacle as he pushed the truck forward. He glanced over at Bella, whose golden brown eyes fluttered open briefly before closing again, her body barely moving. Ethan's chest tightened as he reached out a hand, gently brushing her fur, and whispered to her softly, "Stay with me, girl. We're almost there." It felt like an eternity, but finally, he pulled into the parking lot of his small veterinary clinic. He barely had time to put the truck in park before he was rushing around the front of the vehicle, opening the door and lifting Bella back into his arms. She was so light, so frail, it was as if she might break apart in his hands. Inside, the warmth of the clinic wrapped around them, but Bella barely responded. Ethan hurried toward the examination room, his mind racing with all the possibilities. He had seen cases of neglect before, but this was far beyond anything he had ever encountered. This dog had been abandoned to die, and if he hadn't been there, she would have. The exam room was dimly lit, and the quiet hum of the heater was the only sound breaking the silence. Ethan laid Bella down on the exam table and immediately set to work, wrapping her in thick blankets, turning on the heating pads, and hooking up an IV to administer fluids. His hands worked quickly, the urgency in his movements making it clear that he wasn't about to give up on her, not when she had fought so hard to survive this long. Minutes turned into hours as Ethan fought to stabilize Bella's body temperature and heart rate. Her breathing was still shallow and her pulse was weak, but she was still alive. That was enough for now. He exhaled a breath of relief as he gently stroked her fur, hoping the worst was behind them. As he continued to monitor her, a voice broke the silence. "Uncle Ethan?" Ethan turned to see his niece, Lily, standing in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She was 7 years old, with a mop of dark curls and big, concerned eyes that had always been able to read his moods. She had grown up around animals, and she had the kindest heart. "What are you doing up, kiddo?" he asked, his voice softening as he moved toward her. Lily's gaze moved to the dog on the exam table, and her face instantly filled with concern. "Who's that?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan knelt down in front of her. "I found her outside in the snow. Someone left her there to die," he explained gently, trying to keep the emotion out of his voice. Lily's eyes widened, and her hand instinctively reached out toward Bella. "On purpose?" she asked in disbelief. Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening in anger. "Yeah, on purpose." Lily stepped closer to the table, her small hand brushing Bella's fur. "She looks really sick," Lily whispered, her voice filled with sorrow. "Is she going to be okay?" Ethan hesitated for a moment before answering. "I think so, kiddo, but she's not out of danger yet." Lily's brow furrowed as she watched Bella closely. "What's her name?" Ethan glanced at the dog, unsure. "I don't know. She doesn't have any tags or a collar anymore." Lily's eyes lit up. "Can I name her?" Ethan smiled softly, the tension in his chest easing just a little. "Sure, let's see if she makes it through the night first, okay?" Lily nodded, sitting down beside the table, her eyes never leaving Bella. As the hours passed, Lily stayed by Bella's side, gently brushing her fur, murmuring soft words of encouragement. The storm outside raged on, but inside the clinic, there was a growing sense of calm. For the first time in a long while, Ethan allowed himself to hope. Then, just as the clock ticked toward midnight, something changed. Bella's breathing steadied, her pulse becoming stronger. The color slowly began returning to her cheeks, and her body no longer trembled. Ethan felt a small flicker of hope ignite in his chest. Lily's eyes widened. "She's getting better," she exclaimed. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, she is. She's a fighter." Lily smiled, her eyes sparkling. "She's strong. I just know she's going to be okay." Ethan chuckled softly, brushing a hand through his niece's hair. "I think you're right." Bella's eyes flickered open once again, and this time she looked directly at Ethan, her gaze filled with quiet trust. Despite everything she had been through, she was still fighting. And that gave Ethan the strength he needed to keep going. Morning broke with a soft light filtering through the windows, but the storm outside had not yet abated. The wind howled, rattling the panes of the clinic's windows, but inside there was a calm. Bella had made it through the night, and for that, Ethan was deeply grateful. She had survived the cold, the neglect, and now, with the warmth of his care, she was showing signs of improvement. But the morning did not bring peace. It brought uncertainty. Ethan had just finished checking Bella's vitals when the doorbell rang. A cold chill swept through the air, and for a moment, his heart skipped a beat. He wasn't expecting any visitors, especially not with the storm still raging outside. With a sigh, he wiped his hands on a towel and walked toward the front door, his mind racing with possible scenarios. As he opened the door, a gust of wind pushed its way in, and a familiar face appeared. Deputy Mark Collins, bundled up in his uniform, looking more concerned than usual. Behind him, Ethan noticed the glint of headlights cutting through the snowstorm, the sheriff's car parked just outside. "Mark," Ethan greeted, his tone wary. "What brings you here?" Mark glanced at the truck behind him, then back at Ethan. "We need to talk." Ethan's stomach twisted. The look on Mark's face told him everything he needed to know. This was no casual visit. "What's going on?" Ethan asked, crossing his arms as he stood in the doorway, his mind already jumping to conclusions. "I got a call," Mark said, his voice low. "A man named William Holloway is looking for a dog, a pregnant German shepherd." Ethan's blood ran cold. He knew exactly who William Holloway was, the same man whose cruel actions had almost cost Bella her life. The same man who had abandoned her in the snow, left her to freeze and die. "I'm sure he's not looking for her," Ethan replied, his voice thick with anger. "He left her to die in a snowstorm. He doesn't deserve her." Mark sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I know you're upset, Ethan. I can see it, but you need to understand how things work." The sheriff's deputy paused, glancing at the clinic's door as if to make sure no one was listening. "If Holloway has legal proof that the dog is his, you're going to have to turn her over." Ethan's chest tightened, a wave of frustration sweeping through him. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered under his breath. "It's the law," Mark said, his voice growing firmer. "I don't like it either. But if he shows up with papers proving the dog belongs to him, that's it. It's out of your hands." "Papers?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "This man neglected her. He abandoned her to die. And now you're telling me that if he can prove he owns her, he can just take her back?" Mark looked down at the ground, guilt flashing across his face. "That's the law, Ethan. I don't make it, I just enforce it." Ethan clenched his jaw, trying to keep his emotions in check. "This isn't about the law, Mark. This is about cruelty. This man doesn't care about that dog. He only sees her as property, and he's willing to let her die if it suits him." "I know," Mark said, his voice softening. "But if he comes in here and proves that the dog belongs to him, there's nothing we can do." Ethan felt his chest tighten as anger bubbled up inside him. How could this be the law? How could it be right for someone to abandon an animal like that and still claim ownership? "I won't let him take her," Ethan said, his voice firm. "She's mine now." Mark sighed, his face showing both sympathy and resignation. "I understand, but you need to be ready. If Holloway shows up with proof, you'll have to give her back. I just want to make sure you're prepared." Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I'll be prepared." Mark gave him a nod, but there was a look in his eyes that told Ethan this wouldn't be over quickly. "Just be careful, Ethan. Holloway doesn't play by the rules. He's got money and power, and he'll use them to get what he wants." Ethan nodded, closing the door behind him. He stood there for a moment, staring at the cold, bleak landscape outside, his mind swirling with anger and fear. This wasn't just about Bella anymore. This was about doing what was right. Inside, Lily sat beside Bella, gently brushing her fur. The dog had been resting for hours, and now she was slowly regaining her strength. Ethan could see the glimmer of hope in his niece's eyes. Hope that Bella would make it. Hope that this was not the end of the story, but the beginning of something better. Ethan walked into the room, his face serious. Lily looked up, sensing his mood. "What's going on, Uncle Ethan?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone's coming for Bella," Ethan said, his voice tight, "and it's not going to be easy." Lily's face scrunched up in confusion. "What do you mean? Is he going to take her?" "I don't know," Ethan replied, his heart heavy. "But if he comes, we'll have to fight, and we're going to need to be ready." Lily's eyes widened. "Fight?" "Yes," Ethan said, sitting down beside her, "but I'm not going to let anyone take her from us." Bella stirred on the table, lifting her head slightly and letting out a soft whimper. Lily reached out and gently patted the dog's head. "She's strong," Lily said softly. "She'll fight too, won't she, Bella?" Bella's golden brown eyes met Lily's, and for a moment it felt as though the dog understood the unspoken promise between them. She would fight. She had already fought for her life once, and now Bella wasn't alone. She had a family who would fight for her. The storm outside intensified as the day wore on, a constant reminder of the battle that was brewing in the clinic. Ethan sat at his desk, papers scattered before him, but his mind wasn't focused on anything tangible. His thoughts kept drifting back to Bella, how she had been left to die, and how far he was willing to go to ensure she would never suffer that kind of fate again. Lily was beside Bella, gently stroking the dog's fur, her soft voice soothing the dog. Though Ethan knew the little girl was scared. The tension was palpable, a silent promise hanging in the air. No one would take Bella from them. A knock on the door snapped Ethan out of his thoughts. His hand instinctively clenched into a fist, his jaw tightening as he slowly stood up. He knew who it was, and the confrontation he had been dreading had finally arrived. "Stay here," Ethan said quietly to Lily as he made his way to the front of the clinic. His footsteps were heavy, the weight of what was coming pressing down on him with every stride. When he opened the door, there stood William Holloway, flanked by two imposing men. They were dressed in suits, their expressions unreadable. The luxury car in the driveway was a reminder of Holloway's wealth and power. But Ethan didn't flinch. William's cold blue eyes studied him as if appraising an opponent, and the tight smirk on his lips only fueled the fire in Ethan's chest. "Dr. Carter," William began, his voice smooth but laced with impatience. "I trust you're not going to make this difficult. I've come for my dog." Ethan's eyes narrowed and his fists clenched at his sides. "She's not your dog, Holloway. Not anymore. You abandoned her. You left her to die." William's smirk didn't falter, and he took a step closer, the scent of his expensive cologne filling the air. "I had my reasons," he said with an indifferent shrug, "but I'm not here to discuss that. I'm here to take her back." The words cut through Ethan like a blade. How could this man stand there, so composed, after what he had done, after everything Bella had been through? "She's not going anywhere with you," Ethan said firmly, his voice low and dangerous. "She was left to die in the snow. You don't deserve her." William's eyes hardened, the slight amusement in his expression turning to a cold anger. "She's mine. Legally, she's still my property." Ethan felt a surge of anger flood through him. "You're wrong. She's not property. She's a living being, and she deserves a chance, a real chance to live." William let out a slow breath as if Ethan's words were an inconvenience. "I don't have time for moral lectures, Dr. Carter. I'm a businessman, not some sentimental fool. If you know what's good for you, you'll hand her over. I have legal documentation proving she belongs to me. And if you refuse, I will take this to court." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The law was on Holloway's side, but Ethan was not about to back down. "You think I'm afraid of a court battle? I'll fight you. I'll fight you with everything I have, because you don't deserve to own her. And if I have to, I'll tell the world what you did to her. How you left her in the cold to die." For a moment there was silence between them. William's eyes flickered with something. Resentment, perhaps fear, or maybe just anger at being confronted like this. "You're making a mistake, Dr. Carter," William said, his voice cold now. "I could have the sheriff here in an hour. You're not going to win this." Ethan stood his ground, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside him. "If you want to go that route, Then go ahead. I'll make sure the sheriff knows everything. I'll make sure everyone knows how you abandoned her." William hesitated for a brief moment, his jaw tightening before he turned away, his bodyguards following close behind. As he reached his car, he called over his shoulder, his words cutting through the air like a threat. "This isn't over, Dr. Carter. I'll be back. And when I do, you'll regret this." The sound of his car roaring to life was a final chilling reminder that the battle was far from over. Ethan closed the door with a heavy heart, knowing that the confrontation had only just begun. He had made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in the town, and Holloway wouldn't rest until he got what he wanted. Inside the clinic, Lily was anxiously waiting. She was perched on the edge of the chair, her fingers gripping the armrest as she waited for her uncle to return. When Ethan stepped inside, his face was unreadable, but Lily could see the tension in his posture. "Did he leave?" Lily asked, her voice small and full of concern. "He left," Ethan said, though his tone held little relief. "But this isn't over. He'll be back, and we'll have to be ready." Lily nodded, a determined look crossing her face. "We will be. I won't let him take Bella." Ethan crouched down to her level, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "I won't let him either, but it's going to get tough." Lily looked down at Bella, who was resting comfortably now, though her breathing was still shallow and weak. The little puppy she had given birth to was curled up beside her, still fragile but alive. "We'll protect her," Lily said firmly, her small voice full of conviction. "She's part of our family now. She's not going anywhere." Ethan couldn't help but smile at her words. Her belief in Bella's strength gave him the strength to continue, even when the odds were stacked against them. But as he looked at the dog, resting peacefully now, he knew that the next few days would determine her fate. Ethan was willing to fight for her, no matter the cost. The day after William Holloway's confrontation, the clinic was quieter than usual. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a blanket of fresh snow that glistened under the pale morning sun. Despite the temporary calm, a sense of unease lingered in the air, thick with the anticipation of what was to come. Ethan didn't know how long they had before Holloway would return, or whether he would come with legal threats, with hired muscle, or something worse. Inside, the clinic felt warmer than the outside world, a stark contrast to the harsh, unforgiving environment that Bella had been abandoned in. Ethan checked on her often, monitoring her condition, his thoughts consumed with the fear of what might happen next. Lily had hardly left Bella's side. The little girl's devotion to the German Shepherd was evident in everything she did. She would sit beside Bella, brushing her fur gently, speaking to her softly as though she understood how much the dog had been through. Ethan admired Lily's strength, but even he couldn't deny how difficult it was to remain optimistic. Bella had been through so much already. She had endured the freezing cold, the fear of abandonment, the exhaustion of giving birth to a litter of puppies. And now she was under Ethan's care. But with the shadow of William Holloway looming over them, Ethan couldn't help but feel that they were all on borrowed time. It wasn't long before the doorbell rang, pulling Ethan from his thoughts. He turned to Lily, who looked up at him with wide eyes. He gave her a reassuring nod, though his heart was racing in his chest. He had expected Holloway to return, but the uncertainty of the moment made the situation all the more tense. "Stay close," he told Lily, though he could see the determination in her eyes. She wasn't about to leave Bella's side, not even for a moment. Ethan made his way to the door, his mind already preparing for what might be on the other side. As he opened the door, he wasn't surprised to find William Holloway standing there again, his expression even colder than before. But this time, he wasn't alone. The two bodyguards flanked him, their faces expressionless as though they were merely extensions of his will. "Dr. Carter," William said, his voice smooth and confident. "I believe we need to have a conversation." Ethan stood his ground, refusing to show any sign of weakness. He had already made it clear that Bella wasn't going anywhere, but Holloway's presence made it all the more difficult to remain calm. "I've told you everything I need to tell you, Holloway," Ethan replied firmly. "Bella stays here. She's not your dog anymore. You abandoned her." William's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening. "I don't appreciate being spoken to like that. I've already made it clear that I'm taking her back. I don't care how you feel about it." Ethan clenched his fists, trying to suppress the surge of anger bubbling up inside him. "You have no right to claim her. She was left to die. You're not her savior. You're the one who put her in that situation." William's gaze was cold and calculating, as if every word Ethan spoke was just an inconvenience to him. "You're mistaken. I'm not here to argue. I have legal documents proving that she's mine. And if you don't hand her over now, I'll take you to court. I'll make sure you regret this." Ethan's blood ran cold. He had anticipated this, but hearing it spoken aloud only made the stakes feel that much higher. The law was on Holloway's side, but it didn't change the fact that he had failed Bella in the worst possible way. "I won't let you do that," Ethan said through gritted teeth. "You may have the law on your side, but you'll never have what matters most, the love and care that she deserves. She's part of this family now, and she's not going anywhere." William's eyes flickered with a mix of frustration and rage, but he quickly masked it behind his usual indifference. "You think you're doing the right thing, but you're not. You're just making things harder for everyone." Ethan stood tall, his resolve unwavering. "If you truly cared about her, you wouldn't have left her to die. You abandoned her, Holloway, and that's something you'll never be able to undo." For a moment, there was silence between them. Then, William's lips curled into a mocking smile. "You really think you can win this, don't you? You're just a vet. What chance do you have against someone like me?" Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "I may be just a vet, but I know right from wrong. And I know what you did to her. And if I have to, I'll fight for her every step of the way." William let out a sharp laugh, shaking his head as if Ethan's words were insignificant. "Fine. If you want to make this difficult, then we'll make it difficult. But I'll have her back, and when I do, you'll be sorry." Without another word, he turned and walked away, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the hallway as he disappeared into the snowstorm once more. Ethan closed the door slowly, his mind racing with the weight of the situation. Lily emerged from the back room, her face full of worry. "What did he say?" Ethan looked down at her, his heart heavy. "He's not giving up, but neither am I." Lily nodded, determination lighting up her small face. "We won't let him take her." Ethan smiled softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're right. We won't." The next few days were filled with tension, as Ethan kept a constant watch over Bella. The storm had passed, but the shadow of Holloway's threat still loomed large. He spent sleepless nights monitoring Bella's condition, making sure she was stable as she recovered from the trauma of her abandonment and the birth of her puppies. And then, as if on cue, the storm returned. It wasn't just the weather that turned. Holloway came back with a vengeance. The wind howled again, carrying with it a new wave of tension. Snowflakes danced through the air, settling on the clinic's windows like tiny, cold threats. Ethan had been preparing for the inevitable, the return of William Holloway. He knew it wouldn't be long before Holloway came back, but now that the moment was here, the air felt thick with unease. Inside the clinic, everything seemed to be moving in slow motion. Bella rested, though she was still far from being fully recovered. The puppies, her little survivors, cuddled close to their mother, their tiny bodies seeking warmth. Ethan couldn't help but feel a fierce sense of protectiveness as he looked down at the fragile creatures that had beaten the odds. Lily, too, had become protective of Bella, her bond with the dog growing stronger every day. It was clear to Ethan that Lily had taken it upon herself to be Bella's advocate. Every time the dog stirred, Lily was there to comfort her. It was hard not to admire her determination. But Ethan knew the hardest part was still ahead. William Holloway wasn't going to give up easily. In fact, Ethan had a sinking feeling that the businessman wasn't going to stop until Bella was back under his control, and that meant he would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. It wasn't long before the clinic doorbell rang again. Ethan looked at Lily, who was sitting beside Bella, and nodded. This time, there was no mistaking who was on the other side. William Holloway had arrived. Ethan opened the door, his expression firm, his body tense. As expected, Holloway stood there, flanked by his two bodyguards. The man's arrogance seemed to radiate off him, his expensive coat cutting through the wind like a symbol of his power. But today, there was something different in his eyes, a certain sharpness that hinted at the seriousness of his intentions. Dr. Carter, Holloway said, his voice dripping with condescension. It's time to stop this charade. I've told you, Holloway, Ethan replied evenly. Bella is staying here. She's part of my family now. Family, Holloway scoffed, taking a step forward. She's a dog, and she belongs to me. Ethan's blood boiled. Not anymore. You abandoned her. You left her to die in the snow. And now, you think you can just waltz in here and take her back like nothing happened? That's not how this works. William's lips curled into a thin, calculating smile. You're mistaken, Dr. Carter. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to take what's mine. With that, Holloway nodded to his bodyguards, signaling them to move. Ethan's heart raced as he stepped in front of the door, his body blocking the path to the clinic. He was prepared for this. He wouldn't let Holloway take Bella without a fight. I'm not afraid of you, Holloway, Ethan said, his voice low and steady. If you think you can intimidate me, you're wrong. You're not welcome here, and I won't let you take her. Holloway's eyes narrowed. You think you can stop me? You're just a small-town vet. What can you possibly do? Ethan's hands clenched into fists at his sides. I might be a small-town vet, but I know the law. And I know what you did to Bella. If you want to take her, you'll have to go through me. The two men locked eyes for a moment, the tension between them palpable. Ethan knew Holloway wouldn't back down. He was used to getting his way, and he wouldn't hesitate to use whatever power he had to force Ethan into submission. But Ethan wasn't about to let that happen. Not today. Not ever. You're making a mistake, Dr. Carter, Holloway said, his tone colder now. I'll take this to court. I'll make sure you regret this. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, but his resolve never wavered. Do what you have to do, but Bella is not yours. She's mine now, and she'll never be your property again. Holloway hesitated, his gaze flicking over Ethan's shoulder as if considering his next move. Finally, he turned to his bodyguards. Let's go, he said flatly. This isn't over, Dr. Carter. I'll be back. And next time, you won't be able to stop me. With that, Holloway turned and walked away, his bodyguards trailing behind him. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the silent clinic, and Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. Lily, who had been watching the scene unfold from behind the door, now rushed forward. Is he gone? She asked anxiously. Ethan nodded, though his chest still felt tight. For now, but this isn't over. He'll come back. He'll keep pushing until he gets what he wants. Lily's eyes filled with determination. We won't let him take her. Ethan smiled softly at her words, but the weight of the situation still hung heavily on his shoulders. He couldn't let his guard down, not for a second. Holloway was relentless, and he knew that the next time would be worse. Days passed, and Bella continued to improve. She was still weak, but she had come a long way since that fateful night in the snow. Her puppies were growing stronger with each passing day, their tiny bodies filling the clinic with warmth and life. But the sense of unease never left Ethan. He spent every waking moment checking on Bella, making sure she was comfortable, bathed, and keeping a close watch on her health. The thought of Holloway coming back haunted him, but there was nothing more he could do for now except wait. The storm had passed, but the real battle was just beginning.
Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please support me by clicking the logo in the bottom right corner to subscribe to my channel. This way you won't miss any of the exciting stories coming up. Thank you so much.